Hello and welcome back to Rabbit Trails. I believe this is the 5th installation of Rabbit Trails, and today we are talking about the Nephilim. These are the giants of the Bible, and the title of this Rabbit Trail is "These Giants Are Not from New York." Get it? Well, if you're a football fan, you might get that joke, right? So in Genesis chapter 6, 1-4, we find the text again. We've been in this text for the last couple of Rabbit Trails. As we've walked through this, and the rabbit trail today is chasing after really one of the most awe-inspiring and fantastic, if you will, subjects in all the Bible, and that's the subject of giants, right? Even as a kid, I remember when we talked about David and Goliath, when we talked about the Nephilim, right, the giants of old. It was just such fantastic science fiction type stuff, just stuff that really captures the imagination. So today, on this podcast for the Rabbit Trails, we're talking about the Nephilim. These giants are not from New York. Hey, if you're new to this podcast or new to this YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button at PK Breakfast Club. We're going to continue to do some Rabbit Trails this month. And in just a few short weeks, we're going to begin a summer series of devotions, morning devotions here on the Breakfast Club. And so don't want to miss that. You'll be notified if you hit that subscribe button every time that we go live. And so hit the subscribe button. And you know what? You may have some friends and family that may want to hear about the Nephilim or the giants. Make sure you share this video with them and with all your friends, okay? All right, so Genesis 6, 1-4. Genesis chapter 6, 1-4, it says this. If you have your Bibles, you can take it out and look. It says, "Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God," there's another rabbit trail there. We've talked about that. I think it was rabbit trail 3 or 4. We talked about the sons of God, saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. Verse 4 is the important verse in our rabbit trail today. Verse 4 says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The Nephilim, those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown." So we're not talking about 3 different groups of people, the Nephilim, mighty men of old, and the men of renown. The mighty men of old and the men of renown are the Nephilim, right? These are adjectives that describe the Nephilim, and so we're talking about the same thing. Those are just descriptor terms. And so this idea of Nephilim, who is the Nephilim, right? Where'd they come from? How'd they get here? And where did they go, right? Where did they go? All right. In the Bible, the word Nephilim in this passage is a word that's translated as giants, right? Giants. Simple. You look at other translations of Scripture. I think I'm reading from the New American Standard. You read some of the other more wooden translations, the King James, New King James. It just translates this as giants, but it is the word Nephilim. Nephilim. And so this also is translated as a bully or a tyrant, right? A bully or a tyrant. And it comes, this is important, it comes from the root word. You ready for this? It comes from the root word, Hebrew word, that means to fall, to fallen, or fall away. All right, so that opens up a whole can of worms, doesn't it? So if you watch the idea or the rabbit trail about the sons of God, one of the great rabbit trails that people go down is the idea that the sons of God are fallen angels. And so the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men, to come from the root word of fallen or fallen angels, is pretty interesting. All right? Well, it's interesting to me anyway. So it means giants, a bully, or a tyrant, but it comes from the root word to fallen or fall away. All right. So this word is used 3 times in Scripture in 2 different verses. It's used here in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, Nephilim. And then it's also used in Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. So if you want to look that up, Numbers 13:33. And this is a familiar passage to many Old Testament Bible scholars. This is when Moses sent out the spies, all right, into the promised land to kind of take a look and see what's going on. Those spies came back, right? Joshua and Caleb said, "Let's go, man. Let's go. Land of milk and honey, it is ready for the picking." And then there was the other 10 that talked about these giants that were in the land, and we were but grasshoppers in their sight, right? And so talking about the conquest of Canaan. And by the way, This is after the flood, y'all. Right? So Genesis 6:4 is before the flood. And then Numbers 13:33 is after the flood, the conquest of Canaan. So interesting timeline. Don't miss that significance. So Numbers 13:33 says, there we saw the giants, right? The Nephilim. There we saw the giants. And in parentheses, the descendants of Anak came from the giants. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight. Okay? So they were comparing, right? They were comparing the people that they saw to the Nephilim of Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, right? Because in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, it just says the Nephilim were kind of a byproduct of an unholy union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. And they were men of renown. They were mighty warriors, right? Mighty men of renown. These people had a reputation. So you can just imagine the stories that were told about them. Well, as they go through the promised land, the 10 spies that come back were said, hey, we ran into some modern day, contemporary, real life Nephilim. You have never seen them? We've seen them. They're right over there in the promised land. And so this was used as a scare tactic, right? To get the children of Israel, this generation that God had rescued out of slavery, brought them out of slavery, delivered them. But they would die in the wilderness because they would not believe in the promise of God, because of this testimony of the 10, right? And so there we saw giants, and we were grasshoppers, right? So the word Nephilim here refers to basically a giant warrior, right? And so there's a generalization that's used in Numbers 13:33 that isn't used in Genesis 6:4. But the word is the same. And so they were a type of Nephilim. And when it says in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, and also afterward, it's talking about this time, it's written from a perspective after the flood, talking about before the flood, that before the flood, we would see some of these same type of large, fierce, mighty warriors after the flood. So there's a perspective here, and you got to kind of capture that when you're reading through. You think about Goliath, right? Another large, mighty, fierce warrior, right? Some of you remember the story of David and Goliath. If you don't, man, go look that story up. One of the greatest stories in the Bible. David, this young teenage boy, you can almost imagine a ruddy teenager, right, short of stature, going up against this massive giant, Philistine giant named Goliath, right? In the story of David and Goliath, it gives some measurements about Goliath and about his armor, right? Goliath's height was 9 feet, 9 inches tall. Now, I don't know, looking around today, that's pretty tall, right? That's a tall guy. That would be what we would consider to be a giant, right? This guy was huge, almost 10 feet tall. And not only that, he wasn't just a stick figure either. Sometimes you see these tall NBA players and you don't even know how they run up and down the court. They're so skinny and they just don't look well. Goliath was a massive, mighty warrior too. Look at his armor. His armor weighed 125 pounds by itself. This is his clothes. That's some heavy clothes, y'all. Right? So his armor, battle armor, weighed 125 pounds by itself. His spearhead, right? On the tip of his spear, you can almost imagine how the weaver's rod, it's described as, right? A huge long pole, almost like a tree trunk. And the spearhead weighed 15 pounds at the end of his spear. Absolutely amazing. Huge, strong, amazing, mighty warrior, right? This guy was something to behold. And he wasn't the only one. You read through that passage in 1 Samuel and you recognize Goliath has some bros, yo. He has some brothers that were also large, that were also big, right? And they were also men of renown, right? Big family, right? Big family, okay? So many think that also afterward, right? The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. Many commentators think that the and also afterward means that after the flood, right? After the flood, and that the giants after the flood were synonymous with large, fierce warriors. Just like Goliath. They were synonymous with these large, fierce warriors. Almost like you and I use the word monster to describe so many different things, right? Monster describes those things that we're terrified of, those things that we can't explain, those things that are strange or weird or different, right? And we use the term monster pretty loosely. Well, in the same way, the term giant or Nephilim was used it wasn't used in the same way it was used in Genesis 6:4 afterward, but it was used to describe in generality fierce, mighty, tall, big warriors, fierce warriors, right? And so you get this kind of thing, this feel to what the New Testament, not the New Testament, but after the flood versus before the flood. All right. Now, we're only looking at the text. We're only looking at trying to discover and try to think about who were these Nephilim, these giants, right? Well, there's some things, the mighty men of old, and it describes the Nephilim. The mighty men of old means strong, brave, mighty, champion, could be translated as a giant, a chief, or a tyrant. And so these mighty men of old, these are the people that we used to tell stories about, right? Fables and myths, right? And so the men of renown, that's where this comes from. A name, a reputation, fame, famous, folk hero, or mythology, you know? These are the people that captured the imagination. Stories that are handed down from generation to generation about these mighty, fierce, giant warriors, right? These tyrants, these bullies, these giants that lived once upon a time. And if you look at the context of Genesis chapter 6, evil, wickedness, look at verse 5, wickedness running amok, even to the point that every thought was evil, right? God had no place in their lives. Well, these mighty men of old were kind of leading the charge in those days of evil and of wickedness. And so they made a name for themselves because they were so wicked and so evil, right? And so their fame, their infamy, right, was handed down from generation to generation. We tell stories about men of old that we don't know about, Genghis Khan and Napoleon and some of these people that we've never met. I never met Hitler, but the story about Hitler and about what he did and about how he lived his life and the things that he did, the evil that reigned, I mean, these are lessons from the past, right, that we learn from, but they're also examples of evil, well, that have gone amok. And that's what we get in Genesis chapter 6. And so, mighty men of old, men of renown, Nephilim, right? These were giants, tyrants, bullies. All right, here's some things we know and some things we don't know. First of all, there's much that we don't know that we have to speculate about, right? So let's not be dogmatic. Let's not be dogmatic about who the Nephilim were or who the descendants of Anak and these people were giants. We know that they were fierce warriors. We know that they were men of renown or infamy, and so we don't know too much about them other than the clues that the Bible gives. And so we can't be very dogmatic about them one way or the other. Now, we do know, based upon Genesis chapter 6, that the unholy union between the sons of God, right? Rabbit trail, go back and look at that a couple of videos ago on the podcast. We know that the unholy union between the sons of God, whoever they were, and the daughters of men resulted in some unusual offspring called the Nephilim, who were mighty men of old that became infamous and synonymous with large, fierce, mighty warriors. And so that much we do know. All right, the unholy union of sons of God and the daughters of men. We don't know a lot about that either. Had to speculate a little bit, run down that rabbit trail too. But the offspring of this unholy union were the Nephilim, right? And so there were mutated offspring, that large, giant, fierce warriors. Okay, so the giants or the Nephilim, they are mutations. They weren't the norm, right? They were, even in this passage, you get that. They're mutations. They're not the norm. And that's why I guess they were talked about, or because they were different. And they became famous because of that, of the difference that they were versus everybody else. And so you think about the mutations that we have today, all right? The things that are just outside of the ordinary. You think about dwarfism. You think about giantism, right? This idea that there are giants in the land today, but they are unusual. They're not the norm. That's the same thing that we capture from this passage. The giants or the Nephilim, as we have understood, existed before the flood and after the flood, right? These type of people, these mutated people, these people who are different than just the norm, the average, if you will, that are tall, that are mighty, that are fierce. These are people that are different. They existed before the flood and after the flood, all right? So the Nephilim before the flood and the Nephilim after the flood, they may or may not have been, right, the same in size, strength, and character. We don't know. The Nephilim before the flood, they could have been bigger, right? Faster, stronger, more evil. I mean, certainly you get a judgment by God that's a worldwide flood because of how evil they were. And these guys were called out as more evil, right? Because they were the leaders of evil. They were the bullies and tyrants of the day, right? But were they the same kind as Goliath? Goliath was a bully and a tyrant. Read 1 Samuel. Read that passage with David and Goliath. Same type of attitude, same type of character. But were they, in the context of their evil, were they the same? We just don't know. All right? I'll close with this. Modern day giants, well, they exist, right? And they're considered tall in stature, not necessarily bullies, if you will, right? Modern day giants are considered tall in stature. If you go to the Guinness Book of World Records, which I loved to do as a kid, you look at the tallest guy that was on record. His name is Robert Wadlow, right? Robert Wadlow. And he, the Guinness Book of World Records measured him at 8 feet, 11 inches. Almost 9 feet tall. So this guy was Goliath minus about a foot. Hello? All right, so 8 feet, 11 inches tall. But it was a mutation that caused him to grow that tall. And many times when people grow to be 7 or 8 feet, it is not a healthy thing, right? It's a mutation and they are unhealthy as they live their life. Many of the people who are large stature like that don't live long because their bodies are not equipped. They're not made to handle the things like that, all right? So modern day giants, got Robert Wadlow. You think about the NBA players, right? We used to be in awestruck about 7-footers, right? If somebody had a 7-footer on their team, they were automatically going to win, right? They were automatically had a leg up, so to speak, but a leg up on the competition. Not anymore. Everybody's got a 7-footer, right? And 7 foot, 7'2", 7'4", 7'6". It's not unusual in the NBA, right? And so seven footers are. Well, you may know one. I mean, they're not as uncommon as you will. And so, as you think about the different people that we've come across, I remember a guy named Andre the Giant. I grew up watching wrestling, right? Back in the golden age of wrestling, right? Andre the Giant was a huge guy, 7 foot, 4 inches tall. Right, over 500 pounds. This guy was enormous. His hands, when he covered somebody's head and like picked them up, this dude was unbelievable. But he was a gentle giant when when he was interviewed, et cetera, et cetera. And again, he died early. He was unhealthy. His body was unhealthy. But this guy, Andre the Giant, right, mighty warrior in the world of wrestling. Well, that's our rabbit trail today. The Nephilim, fun to run down this trail, fun to kind of think about who they were and who they weren't and these different things. We know that at the end of the day, there was a judgment against them because they were part of the evil system and the run amok in the world of that time. And so God judged the world and, well, they were part of that judgment. So hope you enjoyed this rabbit trail today. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Share this with your friends. Let's have some fun as we go down some more rabbit trails in the coming weeks. See you next time.